Hey developers, my name is Erik. I'm an author and educator, and I run the Program with Erik YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is really focused on JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and especially Vue.js. So if you guys are interested in any of those topics, make sure you click on that link in the description below. First, I want to thank Traversy Media and Brad for giving me this opportunity to talk to you guys today. So let's just jump into it. What we're going to build today is a full stack personal photo album. So you can think of it as almost like a Shutterfly clone or Snapfish clone, where you're going to be able to log in and you're going to be able to upload your photos. You're going to be able to create accounts. It's going to have built-in authentication, so it has a lot of neat things built into it. For this technology stack, we're going to use actually Amazon Web Services and using the AWS Amplify library. So we're going to use authentication. We're going to look at GraphQL with AWS App Sync. We're going to use storage with S3. We're going to use Lambdas. And then we're going to also look at how you can deploy your application. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. If you guys are following along, I would suggest there's going to be a link in the description below to the actual GitHub repository, which you can go ahead and download to your local machine, and so you can follow along. And also, I'll give you some information how you can sign up for Amazon's Web Services for absolutely free for a year. So check that out as well. So let's go ahead and just get started. All right, let's take a quick look at the app that we're going to be creating today, so you'll get an idea of everything that we're going to be doing. So here is our login, and you can see here I'm just using some really basic styles. I'm actually using a library called Tailwind CSS that we'll be looking at. And after we log in here, we'll be redirected to a create or choose an album page. And this allows us to create these albums. These are just little cards I created down here. Or we can create a new one, and then each album we can upload photos to. So just for the heck of it, I'll create a new album called Test YT for Test for YouTube. I'll click Create Album, and it'll go ahead and create it. You can see it automatically updates down here. We have a new card. Now if we click on this album here, we don't have anything in here right now. So we can certainly add a file. So I'm going to click Select a File, and that'll bring up a dialog box here that allow us to upload any image file that we like. And I'll show you one here. This is called house.jpg. And after I click on it, it'll go ahead and upload. So now it is in here. And nice thing about this too is if I can actually go out and come back in, it does have some latitude and longitude data. And the reason there was a little bit of a lag there is because we're using an AWS Lambda function that gets triggered anytime a picture is basically uploaded from an S3 bucket, and then it grabs the latitude and longitude out of the picture itself and then displays it. So it's perfect because now we can see a whole bunch of information about this photo, and now I can upload more photos. And by the way, it also converted this image to a thumbnail, so it's a little bit smaller. It'll be great for mobile users. It can just pop up really quickly. So this is everything through this app. Obviously, if we refresh it, we actually are authenticated. So we are still logged in, and we can log out. And then every single person that creates an account will have their own unique account. So if I go and click log out here, I can click sign up, and then I can go ahead and just create a new account here for my username, password, and email. So that's essentially the app right there. And then once you log in, you can have your own personal photo book, and also use a lot of the AWS services out there. So if you're not familiar with AWS, it's the Amazon Web Services, and I would highly recommend go to aws.amazon.com and /free. So they have a completely free tier, which is really nice because you can get up to like 750 hours of EC2, like 5 gigabytes of data in your S3 bucket, like all this information, all this different services for free. And it's like 12 months. So it's really a neat deal. You can check it out. If you're starting a brand new AWS account, you can sign up for this and, play around with these services and learn a little bit of how to create a full stack app on the AWS ecosystem. I believe Google has something similar too, and so does Microsoft with their Azure. Yeah, so check that out. After you actually click the create a free account, it'll ask you some information. And once you create your account, you'll be logged into this management console. And this is where you can look at all the different services that Amazon offers. And let me just tell you, they offer a lot of services. There is a ton of things that they offer, from compute, storage, databases, migration, media, a ton of things. But we're just going to look at a handful for this app that we're creating today. Okay, so here is VS Code. I don't have any projects open right now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new Vue project, and that's going to be our front end that's going to talk to all these AWS services. And then we're going to use a library called AWS Amplify to kind of tie it all in. So make sure at any time, feel free to pause the video if you get confused, to look over the code again. There will also be a link to the code in the description below, and also to my YouTube channel. Once again, if you guys are interested in learning more about Vue.js and those things, and AWS. And also each these, I'm going to go through a few different sections, so feel free to jump around. So the first section will be just how to set everything up. So we're going to make a few assumptions before we begin. First, that you have Node.js version 10 or greater installed. If not, go to nodejs.org and download it for your computer. We're also going to assume you have npm version 5 or greater, which will be included with your Node install, and that you have Git version 2.14 or greater as well. I'm going to use Vue CLI to create and get started, and the way to install Vue CLI is you do npm install tacg at vue/CLI. All right, so I already have Vue installed, but if I do Vue tac version, you can see I have 4.5.3 as of this recording. So another thing we need to make sure is we have AWS Amplify, the CLI tool, installed as well. So I'm just going to do npm install tacg at AWS Amplify /CLI. And this will go ahead and install the Amplify CLI as well, so we can use it throughout our project. And by the way, if you're using Yarn, just go ahead and replace npm with Yarn and you can do the same thing. So once you have Amplify installed, you can just hit Amplify or type Amplify and make sure that it's actually running and working. And if it is, you'll get a list of commands, so you know you are set there. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin, and we'll create our Vue project. So we'll do Vue create Photobook YT, and it's going to ask us a few questions. Now, as of this recording, Vue 3 isn't out yet, but everything we're going to do today will work in Vue 3 as well. So we're going to choose Vue 2, but certainly if you want to use Vue 3, you can. So I'm going to choose manually select my features. I'm going to use the router and Vuex and CSS preprocessors. I'll leave everything else the same. By the way, you can just hit spacebar and that will select whatever you want. And now I'm going to choose 2.x. It's going to ask you, do you want a history mode? I'm just going to hit enter for yes. We'll use Dart Sass. We're not going to use any prettier plugins or anything on this. We'll just leave it the defaults. Dedicate config files, and no, we're not going to save it. And so it'll just take a moment here, and it will create the scaffolding in our brand new Vue app. Okay, great. Everything is set up. So I'm just going to go to my photobook.youtube, and let's go and open it up in our VS Code and see what it looks like. So I'm just going to open this up in this Photobook YT, and this should just go ahead and open it. And you can see it here in the left-hand corner, we'll close my release notes, is the folder structure of a Vue app out of the box. So I'm going to open up my terminal again, and I'm going to make sure it works. I'm going to do npm run serve, and this will go ahead and run the server for us, and we'll see if it works here. So I'm going to do localhost 8080. I can type it right, 8080. And cool. So here is our app out of the box. Not much to look at, so we're going to do a few updates to it. So let's go ahead and add a few libraries we need for this project. So I have the terminal open here. I'm going to do Vue add Tailwind. And this will add Tailwind CSS to our project. And Vue basically has a built-in plugin system. So at any time you can do Vue add and a name of a plugin, and it'll install it. There's also something called Vue UI, which gives you a graphical user interface to do the same thing, and it gives you a few other things. But for now, we're just going to use this Vue add Tailwind. It's going to ask us a question. What do you want to generate? I'm going to do a minimal installation. That'll just give me a Tailwind config.js file. And cool. So now I need to install a few other things. I'll do an npm install UUID. And what this is going to be used for is later on we're going to have to create basically unique GUIDs or GUIDs in our app, and UUID will allow us to do that. It's basically a random string of numbers and digits that are highly unlikely to repeat. So cool. So now we have both of those installed. And let's take a look one more time. If we go here, we can look at our package.json file, and we can take a look. Now we can see here we have our UUID, we have Vuex view router, and yeah, looks good to me. So the next thing I want to do is, since I just made a few updates, I like to always go ahead and do a quick developer reload window. So you just type in Command-Shift-P and developer reload, and it reloads everything for us, because I do have a Chrome extension for Tailwind that'll make our lives a little bit easier. It's called the Intelligent Tailwind CSS, and it just gives you autocomplete for Tailwind. So Tailwind is a library that I just installed that helps us with doing CSS. It adds a bunch of utility classes that makes our life a little bit easier. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up AWS inside our app. So to do that, we remember before we installed the AWS Amplify CLI, so we can do Amplify Configure. And what this will do is it will basically scan for plugins. It's going to try to set up AWS Amplify in our CLI, and it'll connect to our console and set up everything we need. So it went ahead and it actually opened up a new browser window, and it opened up the management console. Now it's asking to go ahead and sign in. Since we're already signed in, I'm going to hit enter here. It's going to ask what region I'm going to use. I'm going to use, I don't know, I'll use US East 2. And then it's going to ask me for a name. I'm just going to hit enter and leave the default username it has there. And now it's going to bring me to a page that will basically create a new user in my AWS Amplify. So I'm going to, basically in my console here. So I'm going to click next here. It's going to actually select all the permissions for me that I need. I'm not going to have to worry about any keys. And I'm just going to click create user here. And now I have these two things, this access key and secret access key. So it says complete the user creation using the AWS console. Press enter to continue. Now it's going to ask me for that access key, which I will go ahead and grab and paste. And now it's going to ask me for the secret access key, which I'm going to click show here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. And it says this would update, create the AWS profile on your local machine. Profile name, I'll just call it default. And cool, so everything's successfully signed up and configured, and now our AWS Amplify should be able to do everything it needs to create users and everything like that. And I can go ahead and close this window here. Okay, so after I've done that, I can go ahead and run Amplify init, and this will init the Amplify service inside our project here. So enter name of the project. I'm just going to call it, I don't know, Amplify Photobook YT. And the name for the environment. Now you can, this is the name of the environment. I'm just going to leave it dev, but if you're doing it for production, you can do it prod, and then you can also create multiple environments, but I'm just going to keep it simple and leave it dev. It's going to ask me what IDE I'm using. I'm going to choose Visual Studio Code, which is the one I'm using. And then I'm using JavaScript and Vue. It's asking me source directory, source, dist, and this would be npm run build, which is the way to build it. And start command, I can just hit enter here. This is right. And so this is going to go ahead and just create some default CloudFormation stuff for us. Do you want to use this profile? Yes. We're going to use our default one we just created, but we could have created multiple profiles. And now it's going to initialize the project in the cloud. And basically what this does is it uses something called CloudFormation scripts that it auto-generates, which then gets run against the Amazon Web Services, which creates the infrastructure we need to do everything we want to using the CLI tool. So this will just take a moment. All right, cool. So it says, by the way, you can try Amplify Add API to create a backend API and Amplify Publish to deploy everything. We're not going to do that right this second. But you can see now in our public folder structure, we have everything here, but we also have a new Amplify folder. And this Amplify folder is where all our configuration, all our new functions, a lot of things what we're going to do is going to show up inside here. So here's some backend stuff and some configuration files. So we're going to keep an eye out on that folder, because as we go through this, there'll be new files created in there that we can look at. Cool. So we're not quite done. We do need to add a few other things. So since we are using Vue, there is a AWS Amplify library we should be installing, and also an at AWS Amplify /UI-Vue library, which adds some really nice Vue components that we can add inside our project. We'll be probably taking a look at them, but we'll also be rolling our own. So we'll just go ahead and hit enter here, and those will install for us. All right, cool. So everything went ahead and installed, which is perfect. And now we just need to do a little bit of configuration. Inside our Vue app, we have this main.js file. And this is where you can see we're setting up the router, the store, and the tailwind. And this is the file that basically bootstraps Vue every time the app loads. So we can update this to add a few more files. So we're going to import in Amplify from AWS Amplify, which is the library that we have installed. We're going to import this at AWS Amplify /UI dash, actually it should be /UI Vue. And then finally, we're going to import in this AWS exports file from ./AWS exports. And then we're going to do amplify.configure AWS exports. And then this should set up everything we need for AWS. And by the way, this AWS exports, that's this file that was created here. And this essentially sets up, it's the configuration file for Amplify. So as we add new regions and buckets and things like that, it'll be all included automatically inside this file. And so we just need to make sure that we tell Amplify where that file is and how to configure it. Now, by the way, if you're getting completely confused right now why I've added all these, this is actually in the official documentation. So if you look at the Amplify docs, I could just Google it real quickly. There's this great website at docs.amplify.aws where you can get a ton of information. They actually even have a whole section on getting started. So if you click on this Amplify libraries and then click getting started, you can see you can choose the drop down here and choose Vue. It even tells you exactly what you need to do to get started, including a lot of the things I just talked about. So make sure you check that out as well if you're completely confused right now. Now, since we have all those installed, let's see if we can go ahead and get started here, and let's make sure everything runs. So I'm going to do npm run serve, and I just want to do a quick change right here. I'm going to put it at different ports because sometimes I have problems with that. I'm going to put an 8082, and now if I npm run serve, it should run it on port 8082. And I just want to make sure there's no other problems since we've installed everything. Okay, so the server is running. I'm going to go bring this up on 8082. And yep, looks like it's still working. It looks a little funny because we added the AWS Amplify and the Tailwind CSS, but yep, everything's working as we expected. So let's go ahead and move on to our next section. Okay, so we have our app set up, but we obviously haven't done anything yet. So let's go to the next section, and that is authentication. So I went and stopped the server. So I want to show you guys something. If we do Amplify status here, we can get an idea at any time of what Amplify libraries we have ran or installed so far. And if you could see right here, it just says dev, and it shows our category, resource name, operation, and provider plugins. But we don't have any information as of yet. So we haven't done anything or installed anything. So let's change that. Let's do Amplify add auth. And so the way the authentication works in AWS is they use something called Cognito. So if you look right here, this is Cognito, and you can just open up your management console and take a look there. And Cognito is an identity provider, and it also does something called federation, and it offers user pools and identity pools and identity protection, and it does authorization everything you need to everything you need to use in your app to make sure someone is authorized to use different parts of your app. That's what AWS Cognito does. So we're going to do that, and nice thing is we don't need to know all those things. Using the AWS Amplify, it's going to create a lot of these things for us. It's going to use some sane defaults, so we don't have to be an AWS expert to set it up. So it's going to ask us a few questions. So we're going to use the default configuration here for security. And we're going to ask you, how do you want to sign in? We can use either username or email. Typically, we always have, even if you sign in with your username, you do need to provide an email with Cognito with the default authentication, because it uses that, because it has two-factor. Basically, it uses uses a security token after you create your account to verify your email. So you definitely need to also include email, but we'll just choose username for the actual login. And then it's asking if do you want anything else, and no, I am done there. So now we have added Auth. Well, we have almost added Auth. We have basically just set it up. Now, as it says right here, you have to type in Amplify Publish, which will provision everything in the cloud, or Amplify Push. That's what I'm saying. And then don't worry about Amplify Publish. That's only used if you're hosting in the back end. So now if I do Amplify Status here, and I'm going to make this a little bigger so it's maybe a little easier to see. If I do Amplify Status here, now I should see the provisioned auth that I just created. And let's see if we do. Cool. So you can see here's Amplify Photobook, YT, and it has a create, and it hasn't been set up yet. So I'm going to do Amplify Push, and this is going to actually push it up into the cloud and into AWS for us. And it might ask us a question here. Yep, are you sure you want to continue? We'll do yes, of course we are sure. And it's going to now update the resource in the cloud, and then we'll just take a few minutes here. Okay, so it went ahead and provisioned everything in the cloud for our authentication. So we should be able to use it now. Now, if I'll go and bring this down so it might be a little easier to see, and I'll go ahead and start my server again. Now, if I click in here, we should see a few things that might look a little different. If we click on the AWS exports file, now you can see we have all these Cognito regions and identity pools and everything set up for us, which is nice because this is what basically the app needs to run and to get the authentication working. So we have a couple of different approaches here to add authentication to this app. Now, of course, right now, it's pretty ugly looking and we don't have anything set up. So one way to add authentication into our app is, if remember I told you guys about this Amplify documents. Well, there is a number of UI libraries for React. Actually, it's under UI components, and there's ones for Vue, Angular, Ionic, React, and React Native, which essentially add in pre-created templates that allow you to do authentication. So in Vue's instance, and by the way, if you wanted to, you can look at React. It's very similar. We can click on authentication here and go to Authenticator. And you could see here, you can just inside your template right here, you would just copy and paste, and you add this something called, I'll make this a little bigger, Amplify Authenticator. This is a built-in Amplify component that would allow us to do everything we need to do. So I want to show you guys that real quickly, but first let's do a little cleanup of this app, since it's just kind of straight out of the box and doesn't really need any of these things right now. And we have this whole hello world component, which I will just delete. And so in this home, I'm just going to do a hello world to make sure I see something. And if I come here, cool. So we have our hello world. After we refresh it here, yep, looks just about the way it is. And then if I wanted to, I can even get rid of these router links because I don't really care about them. Okay, so I just have a hello world, nothing too crazy there. So, but let's take a look. If I wanted to add in authentication right off the bat without kind of changing anything, I could just go in here and copy and paste this big blob of stuff. So let's do that. Don't worry, I'll be going, this tutorial will have some copy and pasting, but I will be talking about what we're doing here. So if I come back here, look at this. Oh, don't worry about, look, I have this sign into your account. Now I am getting some errors because I added this vif auth state, which I'm just going to delete for now because we're not going to use it. And I'll make sure I get rid of the quotes there. And I don't know, delete. There we go. So now we refresh it here. And now we have like a built-in, oh, and we got to delete this username here. So we haven't figured that out. We haven't added any of those things here. Okay, so but cool, this is like a built-in AWS Amplify sign in. Sign up has a create account, as sign in, and you have a sign out button. So you can basically start off right here. Now it doesn't look very good and it's a little ugly. However, though, if you really wanted to, you can overwrite a lot of these themes and styles. If you look at the documentation here, you can even change like which buttons it shows on some of these screens. You can change, yeah, you can customize the sign in, and you can add different form fields and slots. It's pretty cool that you can kind of start off quickly on this. And this one, we're going to create our own custom sign in or login page. So we're not going to use this, but it's good to know that this exists. And we'll be coming back to this because we'll be using some parts of it in the future. And I just accidentally did the home button, so I'll put back the hello world. Cool, so now we're back to the hello world. So to start off with, for authentication, you may have noticed when I created this app the first time, I actually created the store. So Vuex is the state management system for Vue.js. It's essentially the way you're going to be able to share information between multiple components in Vue. Just like Redux in React, Vuex is kind of the equivalent in Vue.js, and they're both based on the Flux pattern out there of creating state management systems. You can see here it has states, mutations, actions, and modules, and getters, which isn't normally default installed. I don't know why, but you can actually add getters as well. And then we have modules. So we're going to break this up. I'm going to create a new folder here, and we're going to call it Auth. And we're going to create a new, basically a new file here, and it's going to be called auth.js. And this file is where we're going to put in all our authentication for our AWS Amplify. So we need, at a minimum, a way for people to log in, to log out, and yeah, to keep the state of the application itself. So let's go ahead and do that inside this file. So I'm going to put all those getters, mutations, and actions into one file here, and I'm going to call it auth. And also, just so I have it, I'm going to create this. I'm going to import auth here, and we're going to call it AWS Amplify. So first, we're going to use modules. So modules are a way that we can break up our Vuex store into multiple pieces. So whenever using Vuex, especially if you're in a production app or something a little bit more complicated than a hello world, it's usually a good idea to break your modules into different, basically different pieces. Now, namespace means that this namespace, which we're going to be calling auth, will need to be included whenever you access any of these of this stuff in the store for auth. And then I'm going to create a state, and the state is an object, of course, and we're going to set it to null. And then we're going to have mutations. We're going to have actions, and we're going to have getters. So let's go ahead and fill a few common mutations out. First, the one and only we're going to have is really this one, and it's the state. It's basically setting the user. So what this is saying right here is we're going to, if you commit this mutation, which is set user, it's going to take whatever is passed inside the payload and set it to the state.user. So that's the way you do that. Now, actions are like mutations, but actions handle asynchronous things. So if it's anything like a call out to an API, or you're waiting for something and you're using a promise, then you want to use an action in this case. Now, the way I'm going to form this auth module is like I said, we're going to put our login and logout as actions inside this form, inside this module here. There is other ways to do it. I don't want to confuse you guys. I know some people put these into their own file. Sometimes they call them services or utils. But I think this makes a lot of sense because we want to be able to keep it all in one place and then also manipulate the state of the application when things happen. So we're going to do async logout. And the first parameter inside here is an object, and one of the things out of that is commit. So we're going to destructure it out of there, of commit, and then we're going to run basically commit set user. Remember, we always commit mutations, and we're going to set it to null, and then we're going to return it this auth.signout. And once again, if you're trying to figure out like how did I come up with auth.signout, how did I know it? Once again, in this official documentation, if you go into I believe the library section, and then look at authentication, and then getting started, and signups in right here, you can see here auth.signup. It just tells you all the different ones you need to use to do it. So that's the way I'm doing it here. So that's the only thing we want to add. Actually, we want to add a couple more things. We have a logout, so we need basically a few others. We want a sign up or login, but also we want a log. Let's do the login next. That might be easiest to understand since we just did this one. So we're going to do async login. We're going to commit. We're going to dispatch. And then we're going to assume that someone's going to pass over everything we need for a login. And so the second parameter is always the payload that gets passed in. So we're going to assume that they pass in the username and the password into this async function. And then we can use, there's a few ways we can do this. I like using try catches. Some people don't, but that's my preference. So I'm going to do a try catch here. And this catch is just going to console log the error. And then in this auth here, I'm going to await auth.sign-in. And this is going to be passed in a username and password. Cool. And then once we know that that passes, obviously if this sign-in fails, the catch will catch it, as it says there. But if it doesn't fail, it'll go to the next line. And this is where I want to run this await auth.current user info. And what this is this await right here for this auth sign-in does send us like a object full of basically information about a user. But it doesn't include everything I quite want, doesn't include the ID. So what I do is I just grab it from this auth.currentUser because I know it has the information I need, and I sign it to user info. And now I can do something like this. I can commit set user into our user info state. And then I like to do this too, is I like to return promises. So that way, whatever component is listening to this, that it can still run it as thenable, and then it can also know when then it succeeds. But I also like to do logic here, so that's why I don't like to return this whole await here at the top. Success, obviously maybe I could put something else in there, and I just need lowercase return. And then this catch, I like to return the promise.reject. Okay, so we have two down. So now we have, oops, this got I'm going to call this login. So we have two down. We have a logout and a login, which is good. So now the next thing we want to do is add in a sign up and a confirm sign up. So if you remember what I told you guys earlier, that every time you sign up, you also have to confirm your email. So we need to basically do that as well. So let's add in the confirm first, because why not? So first, make sure I'm at the end of this one, comma. So I'm going to call it async confirm sign up. And this one I'm not going to be doing any commits or actions on, so I put this underscore there. And we're going to have a username and a code. And once again, I'm going to do my try catch block. I'm going to catch the error. And I'll console log the error. But in this try, I'm going to do await and do auth.confirm sign up. And this one is going to take a username. And actually, I should put this lowercase. There we go. Let me delete this. There we go. And there is username and code. So I believe those are the two that we need. And then if that succeeds, we're going to do a promise.resolve. And if it rejects, we're going to do a return promise.reject. You see a pattern here happening. Looks similar. Cool. So that will confirm our sign up. And now we're just going to finally do the sign up, which will look similar. So I'm going to come down here, and it'll do async sign up. And that'll have a username, password, and email. And we're going to do another try catch block. Catch error. And in this try, we'll do await auth.sign up. And we need to pass it an object. This object's going to have the username, password. And this time, we need to send in an attributes object here with the email. We definitely have to have that email there. And if that all works, we're going to do return promise.resolve. And if it fails, we're going to console log the error and do a return a promise.reject. All right, so we have now our sign up, confirm sign up, our login and log out. And the next thing we need to do is see if we can actually, we'll do one more. I kind of like doing this too. We're going to create an auth action. Let's see here. I'll do right at the bottom of this one. And so I just like to have this available, that soon as a user logs in, that this gets ran. Or actually, as soon as the basically app loads is something that I like to do here. And so this is going to be a const user info, await auth.current user info. And by the way, there is a AWS Amplify extension that'll actually help sometimes with some of these autocompletes if you're not using TypeScript. So you can look at that too, and that's why you're seeing some autocompleteness there. So I'm going to do commit set user info. Now I could, anywhere I wanted to set this, I could call this action, but this is fine for now. And then I do have one getter here, and I'm going to call it user. And I just want to make sure it's easy for someone to return the state. Return state.user. In fact, if we wanted to, we can actually shorten this into an ES6 function, ES6 arrow, like this. And we don't even need this to delete. I don't know, a little simpler. Okay, so now we have our getters, our actions, sign up. Okay, now to actually use this, we inside here, we have to import in our auth library. So we can import auth from, we can do ./auth/auth right here. And then we're just going to call it auth. And I don't need these right here because we're just using this. So if I did it correctly, oops, I do have an error. Loading container. Let's see here. I'm going to come back up. Oops, I don't need this loading container. It accidentally loaded in there. And then it says dispatch is defined but never used. So where did I do that? Let's see here. Dispatch. Oh, right here. There we go. So right here in this login, I'm not dispatching anything right now. I'm just committing. Okay, so I don't have any errors. That's good. And if I go back to my Photobook, I still see the ugly hello world, and there's nothing to be seen there. Okay. So what I like to do next is actually create some of these components so we can try to log in. And that shouldn't be too bad. What I like to do is I like to create them inside components, and then I have different pages for each one. So inside the home component, we might just open up the login. So let's create a component in here called new file. We'll call it login.vue. And this login.vue will have everything I need to use to log in. All right, so we're going to use, I typed in vbase and then tab, and it automatically created this. And this is a part of an extension called Vue snippets. So you can just go to the extension here and type in Vue snippets, and you can find it. So this one, we're going to need a few things to get started to really get this up and running. Let's add in what we need in here in our default. So I'm going to create a data object. And we need a username, a password, and I'm just going to leave this lowercase actually. Password. We'll need an email, and we want to show errors, so we'll have an error here as well. And we're going to need some methods. So we're going to create methods here, and then inside our methods, let's use we can actually use a Vuex helper to help us with this, because why not? So import, we can do map. We're going to import map actions from Vuex. And so now we can use map actions in here, and the ways you destructure it here, map actions. And now we need to grab what we want to grab out of it. So we're using modules. So I'm going to use something called login. I'm going to call it login view. And we're going to grab this module called auth login. And I'm going to create logout. Well, we might need a logout view, but let's do login first. So this gives us access to the auth login. Now, once again, if you're completely confused on what I'm doing here, this is a Vuex helper called map actions, which allows us to talk to our Vuex store without having to type in it the other way, which the other way would be you have to type this .store .dispatch, and then you have to pass in auth/login, and it's kind of a pain. So this is kind of a shorthand way of doing it. And I'll show you guys how this works both ways. Now, since we have a login view, but we want to actually log in, we're going to create another method here. So we have map actions here. So I'm going to call it, it's going to async, it's going to be called login. We're going to do a try catch again. Once again, this is kind of the pattern I like to use. And this try, we're going to await this .login view that we just created, and we're going to pass it the username, and actually, to do this, username, this .username, and password, this dot password. And then once we logged in, we'll have to actually go somewhere, but we'll think about that in a moment. And then if we don't, if there's an error, I'm going to set this dot error to equals to error. And yeah, that's what we'll do there. And I'm not going to worry about logging in or logging out right now. Okay, so now we have sort of the data here that we want. And so the next thing to do is to actually create our forms and our labels. And this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy and paste a already created HTML template for us, just for the sake of time, because I don't think you guys want to see me typing all this out for the next 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So I'm going to copy, I'm copying this from another screen here. So just take a second, make sure I got it all. Okay. All right. So let's take a look what I got here. So I have this form, and by the way, these are all utility classes here, this flex-col, item center, and if you are interested, look up Tailwind CSS. That's what this is. And what this is saying is we're going to submit.prevent login. So every time you submit something, it will run the login method that we created. We're using just some flex. We have a username. We have an input that we styled. It's type text, vmodel username. And vmodel in Vue is a way you can do a two-way data binding. So that way this input, whenever the text changes, it'll also update the input. And then we have the ID username because we're using a for right here, or we're using a label, excuse me. And then here's our password. Let's just type password. And then we have a sign in button. And by the way, we have this class called button-blue. So we'll have to do one more thing. I created, I'm just going to copy and paste here. I created a utility for button blue that I created a few of them. And I'm just going to copy and paste them. So as part of Tailwind CSS, it creates this asset folder and then this tailwind.css. And so we can add in like specific global Tailwind CSS specific classes inside here. So this one's for button blue. Here's the hover effect and focus effect. And by the way, the new version of Tailwind, you can actually put all these utility classes in one, the hovers and the focuses. You don't have to break them up. That's kind of a cool improvement they just added, by the way. But okay, so I think I have this login working here. And so now I should be able to have it show up here. So instead of having this ugly hello world here, we're going to add a component. So we have to import it in. Import, we're going to call it login from. Remember, you can use @sign. That's like the basis of the source folder. And then we can do such components /login.view. And now we should be able to put it in here. And by the way, this is just an ES6 shorthand. You can just type in login.login or just login here. And now I think this will work. We might have some errors, but we'll fix it if it doesn't. Okay. Okay, it ran. All right, so I'm refreshing it. I got no errors. And now I have a username and password. Now it's giving me property or method username is does not defined. Oh, I have a bug here. Come back up here. I think I called this with, I don't know why I kept it. Here, there it is, lowercase n. If I refresh it. All right, that's good. So now let's go ahead and create a few routes. And we need to create a sign up too and a nav. We got a few things to do. So let's go to our routes. That's inside our router here and inside our index.js. And inside this index.js, we are going to add in our routes. So we have essentially this home, but we also have an about. I'm going to leave the about there. I don't care too much about that, but I'm going to create in a sign up. So I just type it in like this. Name, we're going to call it sign up page. And we're going to do component sign up, which we haven't created yet, but we will soon. And then we'll need to create a couple of pages for our albums, which we will also create here in the future, but we want at least to have some place where they should go. So I'm going to create a path, and we'll do album, and it's going to be dynamic. That's the album ID, and I'll do a name here, album detail page, and component album detail page. And meta, we're going to actually have, this is a way we can prevent people from going to places they shouldn't. So this requires auth is a way we are going to do a little bit of authorization to make sure that someone can access that page before they go to it. And I'll show you how to do that with route guards here in 1 second. So we're going to do /albums /name equals albums page. So we want to have a page that lists all the albums, and then the details page, which has like each individual album. In component, we're going to call this albums page. We haven't created this component yet. We're going to get some errors, but that's fine. And we're do requires auth true on this page. Okay, so let's create all these components. So inside our left-hand side here, we have these components, but we also have views, and these are essentially the pages of the app. So we're going to create an albums page.vue, and I'm just going to really quickly create it and do a h3 hello world. And then we have a sign up page, and create a new file here. We're going to call it sign up page. Make sure I spell it right. Page. Well, we'll call it component sign up.vue. And we'll make sure to do an h3 here, sign up. I think that's it. So now we have an albums page and a sign up. Yeah, we have a sign up. Let's call this sign up page just to be consistent. Page. So we have an album details page. Let's create that file too. Albums detail page.vue. Album details page. And then we'll rename this to sign up page.vue. Okay, so we have page at the end of each one of these. You don't have to do that, but I'm just doing it to make sure I understand what I'm doing. So albums page and then sign up. Okay, so I have all three of these. Now I should be able to import all three of them in. So we're going to import sign up page from views sign up page.vue, and then this is going to be albums detail page, albums detail page, and this is going to be the albums page, albums page. So what did we have? Album detail. So the only thing I don't know, albums detail. Oh, I called this albums. It's an S. Okay, so it says couple bugs here. This should be albums detail page. All right, so now I don't have any errors. Good. So it looks like all these are connected up. All these routes are connected. So we need a navigation way. So we have a way to log in right now, and so if we just type in some random things in here and hit sign in, it's not working. So let's actually, we do have an error here. Unknown action types auth login. So the first thing I like to do is let me stop and restart the server. And I'll go back here to auth.js. And we do have a login component here. And we do have a module called login here. So we're getting close. Let's just make sure it loads. And if we go to our login component, yeah, this.login view, which is auth/login. That should be right. Okay, so it's done reloading. Let's see if it works now. Vuex, unknown action type, auth/login. Oops, actually I found a bug here. This should be actually named spaced, the D. Cool, so now if I try to log in, don't worry about this change password error. It's just mentioning something in Chrome. Okay, I get user does not exist. Good, so we at least know the login should be working if we had a user. But now we need to have a way to create the sign up page and also some navigation stuff. So we created a sign up page.view. Now I could create a separate component, but I'm just gonna put all the information in here for this sign up component. And so let's start with the export default here. And I'm going to have a data object. And so for this one, we're going to have a username, a password, an email, and an error. We're going to have a confirm password. So remember, we have to do confirm password as well. We're going to have a code. And I think that should be it for this one. And it's giving me an error because I need to return it as an object. There we go. And I need to now go ahead and try to, oops, I'm getting that error there, to create the sign up and confirm sign up methods. So let's start with the sign up. So once again, I'm going to use methods here. And we're going to do an async action called sign up. And first I'm going to check to see if the email is no good. Actually, let's see here. Yeah, I should check if the email is not there or there's no password or there's no email or password. Then just go ahead and return. And we could return an error at this point, but I'm just going to return it. And I'll set up a try catch block. And then in this try, I'm going to wait this.store. Now this is the other way to do it. Instead of using map actions like we did in the login, I'm going to use just the way you would normally do it if we didn't do it that way. So we can do this.store.dispatch, and this.store is just built into Vue, so you don't have to do anything special to add that, as long as you have Vuex installed. So this is going to be auth/signup. So you always put in the namespace and then the whatever you're dispatching. And remember, you always dispatch actions and you commit mutations, so don't get those two confused. And we're going to have a username, which is going to be this.username. And then password is this.password. And then email, this.email. So for signing up, we definitely need all three of those. Now if that all works, then I'm going to have to change this confirm password to true. And now, and if it fails, by the way, we'll do this dot error equals error. So we have an error on the screen. And then we need to create a new one called confirm signup. Confirm signup, if I can spell right. And then I'll do this if this dot, there's no username or there is no code, then we're going to return as well here. Otherwise, we'll do our catch block. And then inside our try, we're going to await this.store.dispatch auth confirm sign up. And then this is going to have an object here. And we're going to pass in the username, which will be this.username name. And code, which will be this.code. So we're going to obviously create this in a second. And then one thing, this is kind of weird about AWS, but once you create a sign up and you confirm it, you're not technically logged in, but we can go ahead and just log ourselves in. So I do a wait here, and we'll have to dispatch this time auth login. And you're probably thinking, why don't we just use the map actions? But just for the sake of learning, we're not going to use it in this time. We're going to use username, this.username, and then password, this.password. A little tip, if we wanted to, we could actually destructure this. We could do const username, password, and then have it equal this. And then you wouldn't have to do it like this. We could just do like this. I guess code would be one of them too. Code. It's a little simpler, but I don't know. Okay, so there's username and password. And oops, actually opened in that. And then we would push them to a different place. So once they're signed up, we can do this.router.push. And we want to push them to albums, because that's the new route we just created. And okay, we got one error, empty block statement, no empty. So where do we have that error? In here somewhere. And line 50. Oh, right here. We can do console log error. And it just says right there, it says line 50. Okay. Sweet. So, and then we could set the error, I guess. Error equals error. All right, so now we have all the JavaScript, but once again, we need the code. So I'm going to paste this from another screen. Once again, just to save a little bit of time. Okay, so here's the form that we have. And what I'm doing is anytime there's not the confirm password, we're going to show the normal form. And the way it looks is like this. It has a username. We have a vModel again with username. It's an ID. We have a password. We have the password here, ID password. And we have an email that it asks for. Let's just type email. And then we have a sign up button. And now we have an error text. Now we have a confirm password. So once you actually create your login, this confirm password section will open up because I have a VF here. We're asked for a code and a button to save it. So obviously we don't have any fallbacks if, like, let's say they accidentally refresh the page or they don't put anything in to the code and then they try to sign in, that won't work. But let's take a look here. So now if I go to /sign up and it loads, cool. So here's our username, password, email. We got an error. Once again, I don't know why I accidentally used uppercase N here. Okay. Compile it. Refresh. Sweet, no errors. Don't worry about this. It has this highlighted red. I'll have to see. It's a part of a CSS just to put that in there. I don't remember why I put that in there, but we can remove that border. I think it's, let's see here, border red. I'll just delete it. I don't know why I left it in there. Probably we can use it in there if you wanted to do some like validation. Okay. Cool. So now we have username, password, email. But we want an easy way. We probably need an easy way to switch between both between the login page and the sign up page. So I'm going to create a new component here called nav. Let's see here, nav.view. And this nav.view is just going to be really simple. It's going to have a log out button. And then it's also going to have all the information we need to log in, or to log out, and to switch between the sign up page and the login page. So let's do that. So export default. I'm going to have let's start with methods. We're gonna have a methods, and this methods is gonna have a logout, and in this logout we're gonna do await this.store.dispatch auth/logout, and then this.router.push to the logout page, so basically to the front page. And by the way, I'm waiting to make sure that this logout completes before I go to the front page. And then I'm going to have a computed property here, and actually I'm going to use something we haven't used before. I'm going to import in the Vuex a Vuex helper called mapGetters, just to show you how that works. You know, you don't have to do it this way, but I like it. And I'm going to do .mapGetters, and it's an object. Once again, I'm going to do auth/user. So now I have access to the user object, which is going to be really handy. Now I'm going to copy and paste once again the actual HTML, and I'll show you how it works. Ooh. Okay. All right, so once again, I'm using this course Tailwind CSS. I have this a user, so it's going to have this basically at the top of the screen. We're going to have this navigation bar, and it's going to have a router link to the login page, to the sign up page, but the sign up page will only show if you're not logged in. So this @user, remember in our Vuex store, we're setting the user to be either basically with the user information or not. So if it doesn't have any user information, then you're going to have a way to log in or sign up. But otherwise, you're going to actually have a little welcome message that says user username. And then we're also going to have a link to our albums page and a logout button. And we can delete this. We're not using it. Cool. So now we have a navigation bar. Let's add that navigation bar to our main page. So instead of having nav here, we can, let's see here, we'll add the nav right in the same area. We're going to call it nav, and of course I got to add it. So we're going to add a script tag. See, I think I have a snippet for this, for a script tag. Here it is. And now I can do a components, and then this is where I define my components. I also have to import in nav from, and remember we always @ components /nav.view, and now we can add in nav here. So if that works, you should see now nav got cool. Now we have a login page and a sign up page. Now one thing we want to make sure is when we log in, it goes to the right page. So let's look at our login view. After you log in, it doesn't really do anything, so we can do this.router.push to albums. So let's see if it works. So first I'm going to create a new account. I'm going to call it Erik 111. How about we do Erik, 111. And put a password in here and an email address, and I'll make sure I can check this email. So I'll do Erik@programwitheric.com, and I'll click sign up. Cool, and make sure I don't need to save it in here. Enter your code. So I'm going to take a look on another screen, my email, and see if I can grab the code. So it should have emailed me. It did. So I'm copying the code from my email. All right, I'm going to click confirm code, and it should log me in if all goes well. Cool, so now I'm in the albums page. I'm logged in. Oh, and I had an unknown action auth login, so I think I might have had a typo there. I did. So it actually, the dispatch, it still pushed me to albums, but it didn't necessarily log me in, so there was a little bit of an issue there. So let's log ourselves out. Yeah, so as you can see here, these didn't update correctly because the user didn't get set because it didn't really sign up correctly. So I'm going to go back to here to 8082 and I'm going to try my login 111. Sign in. Cool. So this time it worked, and you could see here, make this a little bigger. Now we have our welcome with this name on the top left-hand corner. So let's create another one to see if it works all the way through. I'm gonna do Erik 222. Make sure I put in a password, and I'll do Erik. We can do another email address I have. Let's see here. We'll do Erik Hanchett blog +1 at gmail.com. Cool. Let's see if I can. Okay, so I have another verification code. Let's see if it logs in correctly this time. Confirm. Cool. So now it logged me in and everything looks good. I'm now on my albums page. Now if I click albums, there's nothing there, of course. If I click log out, I'm logged out. Now there's one more thing we can do. You may have noticed, so if I log in here, like let's say I just go to /albums and I'm not logged in, it actually goes to the albums page, even though technically I shouldn't be able to go to this page because I'm not logged in. So to fix that, we can do something kind of neat. You can add a little quick route guard into the index router right here. So here's the router index, and now we need to add in a route guard. And to do that, let's see here. We need a router before each. And by the way, this is all in the documentation for a Vue if you ever need to find it. So do router, and you can also look at the application in the description so you can kind of follow along. So we do a to, a from, and a next. And this is a callback here. So this is essentially what this before each, every time you go into a route, you can do something, and you can make sure that you're authenticated, or you can reroute to somewhere else. So I can do const requires auth, and you can do to.matched.sum, and then we do this record.meta.requires auth, and so we'll be using that in a second, and we'll do a const is authenticated, and then we'll await the auth.current user info, and we'll need to import. Oh, it's already imported in at the top, so that's good. And now we'll do if requires auth and is authenticated, then you can go to the next. So this is like a middleware, so you can go ahead and go to the next place. Otherwise, we can go to the next here. So this is back to the root. Otherwise, you can continue on. And so we have a bug here. So we need to. Oops, actually, this should be a arrow function. There we go. And so this requires auth. It's basically looking at this meta information, and if the meta information requires auth equals true on this route, and that's what this toMatch_sum does, then it'll be true. And then if this auth.current user info is from AWS, and if both are true, if one's not true, then it'll just go back to the login. But if requires auth is true, and you're not authenticated, then you can go to next. So that's essentially how that works. So if this is true, so it is authenticated, and they don't require auth, then it goes to the next. So let's take a look if that works. So now if I type in right here /albums and hit enter, now it redirects back to this page here because no one's authenticated. So if I go here and sign in, it takes a second. I didn't add any loading spinners. Now I'm in the albums page, and cool. And if I refresh it, you can see here it's the albums page. Cool, I'm still in the albums page. Now you can see right there for a second, this is wrong. Why is this login and sign up not right? Well, that's because we didn't actually set it anywhere. That's why I created this in our store, our routes. I created this action called Auth action. So we can actually dispatch this probably as soon as the app loads to make sure things are okay. And so that's probably a good idea. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the app.vue, and I have this script file here just with the nav components, but I'm going to create one called methods, and I'm going to use map actions this time. I don't know, I've been kind of going back and forth between the two so you guys can kind of get an idea of it, but I'm going to use map actions from Vuex. So I'm going to do map actions. And this time, this is the other way of doing it. Before, you can do it this way, and I can do auth. Or actually, basically what the auth action, like this, and then I can put in auth/auth action. There's another way of doing this, which I haven't shown you yet, but you can do auth, and then you put in a array of the ones you want, and now this will have an auth action will be available. And now on the mounted hook, so this is part of the lifecycle hooks of Vue.js. This gets ran as soon as the component's created. I can run this.auth action, and it's going to go ahead and run that Vuex store. So let's see if that works. So if I refresh it, cool. So now as soon as the app loaded, it ran this action, which is the auth action, which then set the values inside the Vuex store to show up correctly. And if you look at the Vue, I have this Vue Chrome extension, and you click on Vuex, you can kind of take a look at what it did. So if I refresh it, you see here's this auth.setUser. You can see right here, it set the user to auth, and now we have the attributes. We have this ID and username, and now it's working. And if you're logged out, it set the user object. If you click on this, it's null now. And if I refresh it, it's going to run that auth action again. It's going to come back as null, and it's still null. Yeah, it's still null here. There's no errors. Cool. All right, and let me also do one last thing that's kind of bothering me, this red border that I accidentally added. All right. So this is it for the actual authentication part of the video. So next we'll look at how we can add GraphQL. Okay, so now we have a working authentication. We can log in and log out, but it's not very useful because we don't have our album set up. So first thing we need to do is let's go back to our terminal, and let's go ahead and Control C this, and let's go ahead and install the storage for AWS Amplify. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to hold all the pictures in an S3 bucket. So we just need to do Amplify add storage, and then it's going to ask us a few questions here. So first we're going to choose images, audio, video, and then it's going to ask us a friendly name for it. So I'm going to call it Amplify Photos Storage, and I'm just going to hit enter. Just going to leave the default bucket name, and we're going to do auth users only. When you want to make sure no one publicly or guest users can use it, they have to be authenticated, and we want to give them options to be able to create, read, and delete. And it's going to ask us for a Lambda trigger. We're going to put no here, but later on we're going to add in a Lambda trigger, but we're going to do no for now. Cool. So now we have, if we do Amplify status, you can see here, it'll just take a second, that we actually have a new storage ready to be created. So before we move on, but let's go ahead and add in our API, and we want to actually use the App Sync. This is the AWS App Sync. If you're not familiar with that, if you go back to our management console, let me just refresh it here, make sure we're still logged in. So if you go here to our AWS Management Console, you can see we have AWS App Sync, and if you click on it, this is this is the way you can create APIs. You can create REST APIs. You can also create GraphQL APIs. It's all done through here. There's a bunch of documentation on AWS App Sync. You can see right here. You can build data-driven apps. At global scale, so it's effortless. You can have it. You use a GraphQL schema. It can connect to your DynamoDB and essentially to your storage. So it's a really cool service, and it's worth checking out. So if you're used to like Firestore, you might see some similarities. But let's take a look at the GraphQL version of this. So we do Amplify add API. And then from here, it's going to ask us a few questions. So we want to use GraphQL. And for the provider name, we're going to call it Amplify Photos API. And it's going to ask us to choose the default authorization type for this API. And we're going to use the Amazon Cognito user pool. That's part of what we've already created. And it's going to ask if we want to do a few more things, and we're going to do yes. I want to make some additional changes. Let's configure additional auth types, yes. And I'm going to choose one here for IAM, and this will allow us to essentially later on in the future, we'll be able to talk to our Lambda, we'll be able to talk to it, and it's just a little bit more configuration that we need. So I'm going to make sure that's checkmarked there. Configured conflict detection, no, we're not going to worry about that. Do you have an annotated GraphQL schema? We're going to put no there. And it's going to ask us what describes your project. So single object with fields, object one-to-many, object with find. So I'm going to do single object fields with to-do, with ID, name, and description. And we'll just give it a second, and it'll go ahead and create it. And do you want to edit the schema now? I'll just do no. I'll just hit enter there. Cool. So now we have this in place. But what we want to do is we want to actually create our GraphQL schema. So if I clear this and come take a look here, I'll just need to go to Amplify Photos API. Here, I'll show you guys if we need to make a change. So now in our source folder, we have this, if we go up here to Amplify, we have our backend, and then our API, and we have our resolver stacks, but we have this schema.graphql, basically API/Amplify Photos. And so here is the schema that was created just out of the blue here. So this schema really is a way to configure our GraphQL database. And you can see here there's something app model. So there's different annotations that you can add in. And when you have an app model, basically it tells the API that you can store the data in DynamoDB. It generates the DynamoDB database as the data source. It also it adds, if you use at a model, it also kind of adds in a few of the other things you need to be able to update or delete, things like that. So it's really nice for us to kind of get started with. This is all documented in the GraphQL documentation through AWS. So I actually have a schema that I've already created that I want to copy and paste in here, and then I'll go through it with you line by line. So just to, once again, to save us a little bit of time rather than you can see me type for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to delete the model one. So we're going to call this type album. So this is, we're defining a type here called album, and it has it's going to use model, which again I said it's going to connect it to the DynamoDB. And this at auth, this basically tells it that we're going to be using authentication, and it's basically its annotated objects are protected by a set of authorization rules, generates snippets of App Sync resolvers to enable authorization. It's basically primarily how we're going to allow the Lambdas to talk to it and to have only certain users be able to use the API. So in this case, you have to actually be like an authenticated Cognito user to use it, and the owner of the album. And then here's the GraphQL schema. I believe the bangs or exclamation points are telling it that these are required. So you need an ID, an owner ID, name, and then we have a created at, update at, and then we do this photo, and then this at connection is a way to, it basically adds relationships between multiple objects annotated by model. So it kind of creates everything you need to do between the different relationships. So we're gonna have a relationship with album photos. And then you can also set like the sort field which is at the created at. And then we have our type photo here, which once again, it's a model. We're gonna allow the owner, but it's also, you can see here as provider IAM, because we're gonna have connections between the photo GraphQL and our S3 bucket, and it has to have some little bit authorization to do that, so you can read and update. And then you can see here we have ID created at, we have a full size bucket. It's an S3 object because we're going to be storing essentially the location of where everything is inside this GraphQL schema. It's going to have thumbnails, GPS, height and width. We have an S3 object, which again, it's going to be able, it's a type S3 object, and it has this authorization through IAM and Cognito user pools. And then we did add a GPS here, which we'll be using in the future, but so we can use that, but we don't have it right now. Okay, so I'm going to save it, and essentially what you need to do now is see if we can set up, be able to set up everything so we can actually go in and test things out. But first, I want to show you kind of a neat feature of this. Since we now have this schema in place, we can actually mock it out and test it locally. So the way I do this is I'm going to create two terminals here. First, I'm going to just start the server again, npm run serve. And then while it's starting up, I'm going to hit plus here and open up another VS Code terminal. And I'm going to make sure my Amplify status is working. So I'm going to see if it works here. Cool. So here's the two things we added, the storage and API. We haven't pushed it yet to AWS, but they're showing up. And I want to make sure I'm still working here. So I have my login. Let's see if we can log in real quickly. We're going to sign in. And if it all works, okay, cool. We're logged in. And now I'm going to go to my second terminal here. I'm going to run Amplify, I believe it's Amplify mock API. I think that's the command that we need here. Yep, mock API. And now what this is doing is it's going to create a mock API server. It's going to ask us a few questions, so that way we can continue on through here. So it's creating the new albums table, the new photos table. It's asking us the generated language type. So we're going to choose JavaScript, and we're just going to leave it the default here. And do you want to generate all updates? We're going to say yes. Enter maximum depth. I don't know. We can leave it 2, but I'll just put 5 in case we wanted to play around with it. All right, now this is a thing to remember. You can see right here it says the endpoint is running at this. This is my local my basically local IP address. But since I'm running my server here on localhost, what I do then is I just open up localhost at 20,002, and it should open. So let's see here, 20,002. Cool. So here, I'll close this. So here is like basically the GraphQL playground. It's running locally. It's mocked out. Make sure that one thing I've noticed though is since I have authentication turned on, I need to make sure that I have my Photobook logged in, and that sometimes you have to log out and log in. We'll see here. Otherwise, when we try to do any GraphQL mutations here, they may fail. So since we have that in place, we should be able to create an album. And you can, what's cool about this is if we don't know what we did, we can look at our docs. We can look at queries, mutations, subscriptions. And by the way, you can also log into AWS App Sync, and then you can also kind of play around with adding mutations, and you can do it directly in your production database if you wanted. But you can see I have queries, mutations, subscriptions. So I didn't know what mutations I had. I could be like, okay, I have create album, update album, delete album. If you remember, when you created that schema, we didn't add in all these. We didn't create album, update album, but we added the app model, and it did all this for us. It created all the schema for us, which is really cool. We can also, of course, change these. These I'll show you guys in a second. We can update any of these if we don't want the kind of generated schemas that it created. So let's see if we can create, just to play around, a mutation. So I'm going to call one called create album. And if you don't know GraphQL at all, GraphQL, you have to create these queries. I'm not going to go into the exact way they're created. I'm still learning myself, but it seems pretty simple. You can also hit Control Space at any time, and it gives you like what you can do. And then I have to put in an input. And input's an object owner, and make sure you always put in double quotes, not single quotes. Call it user1. I don't know, owner ID ABC1234, and name my first album. Okay, and then we can tell, we always have to tell GraphQL what we want to be returned back. So we say, okay, we want an ID returned back. So we're essentially creating an album. You can see here on the left-hand side, it even tells you like, hey, these are the things with the stars that you need definitely to add in there. And it should create it, and it's returning an ID. We can also have it return like the name or create it at as well. And I'm gonna hit play here. Cool, so it went ahead and created. If you're following along right now and you get some access denied message, go back, make sure you have your Vue app running and it's logged in. And make sure you have localhost here at the top, because and this one's localhost too, because if you don't have all this matching, it's gonna give you an access denied, and it's very frustrating. You won't know what's happening. Cool, so it created an ID here. Now this is just local to here, but now we can kind of play around with it. So now I've created an album, now I can create a photo. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the photo now, that since we've created the album. So I'm going to create a new mutation. I'm just going to call it create photo. Inside create photo, I'm going to create a photo. And that's going to have an input, and that's going to be an object. And so we'll need the photo album ID, which I'm going to copy and paste from over here. We'll also need the full size, and this is essentially something that would have been returned from our S3 bucket. So I'm going to US West 2 bucket my bucket, and key equals photo 1, and then we'll have to actually have something that returns. So that would be an ID and perhaps an owner. So let's see if this works. I'm going to just comment that out. Cool, so now we've created a photo. So now we've created an album and we've created a photo for that album. And this is essentially what we're going to have to do inside the code. Now let's say we wanted to query all the albums. So to do that, we have this handy query called myQuery. Well, we can call it whatever we want, but we're going to call it myQuery. And we're going to do list albums. You can see on the left-hand side that sidebar changed, so it kind of gives us hints on what we need to do to create our queries. ID and name. We play that. Cool. You can see here's the album we created, which is really nice. And we can also, if we wanted to, we can grab the photos out of this. So there is photos here. We can put like a limit on it. We only have one in there, but if we wanted to, we can limit it. And then we can decide what we want to return from it. So in these photos, I don't know, I just want to return items. And then inside items, we can return the name, album, full size, thumbnail, GPS. I guess we called the last one, we didn't really give it a name or anything, but we gave it a full size. We can create, I don't know, the ID. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, for this full size, we actually have to tell it what we want to grab out of it. So maybe region. There we go. So now we got USOS 2. So we saw that album we just created. So you can see this is really powerful. And the nice thing about GraphQL is you can, with these queries, you can get exactly what you want. You don't have to grab a full REST API and have a bunch of things you don't need. You can just grab exactly what you need, and it's really intuitive and pretty easy to do. So that's this part of it. Let's go ahead and push our data back. Let's go back here. So we can go and stop our mock API, Control C. And we're going to do Amplify push. And this will go ahead and push the S3 storage and our GraphQL schema to the cloud. So this will just take a moment. Okay, great. It went ahead and created, which is awesome. Now we even have a GraphQL endpoint. We're not going to use this directly right now because it does require authentication, but it's cool it's in there, and also it added this into our AWS exports file. Now, by the way, if you were following along and it asks you a couple of questions after you hit Amplify push, if you want to, are you sure you want to continue? Make sure you type Y there. Do you want to update code for your updated GraphQL API? You can put no there, and then do you want to update your schema scripts? You put yes there, and then that will make sure that the code is pushed into your AWS Amplify, and also that if you go in here, you look inside your VS Code, you now have a GraphQL folder, and inside the GraphQL folder, you'll have your new create album. All your mutations that you need are updated. Update album, delete album. You'll see that all here. If you're looking at this folder and you see a bunch of to-do stuff, you probably didn't do this correctly when you pushed it. So make an update change, update the Amplify API, Amplify Photos schema GraphQL, change the schema, go ahead and push again, and make sure you generate those files. Say yes to if you want the files to be generated, and that way your mutation queries and subscriptions are all correct. Now we're going to look at mutations and queries today. What's the nice thing about GraphQL is you can have real-time updates happening. So you can have subscriptions on any time an album updates, or anytime the owner, something updates in your app, or photos created or deleted or anything you want. We're not going to look at subscriptions, but it's a pretty cool tool. So you can find things that happen out in real time. You can see things update in real time, that is. We're going to do a different way of updating our libraries and albums. So now, since we have all these queries kind of in place for us, we're going to now kind of go into the phase of setting up our Vue.js app with our new GraphQL schema that we created. So the purpose of this is we want to be able to list in this albums detail page. We have our different pages here. Let's take a look at them. They're in our views folder. We want an albums page. We want all the pages listed, and we want to have a way to create albums. We don't have any way to delete albums, but we can add that later if we wanted. And then when you click on any individual album, we want it to go to the albums detail page, which will then list the photos in that album. So that is our goal. So we're going to take the same approach we did with the authentication. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And we're going to, inside the store, I'm going to create another module to do this. And so this will just take a moment. We're going to create one called, I think I'm going to call it albums, not to be confused with the other stuff, but we're going to create a new file. Actually, let's create a new folder first. We'll call it albums. And then inside that albums, I'm going to create a file called albums. If I can spell right, .js. And here's where we're going to create our albums. Now there's going to be a lot of code here, but I'm going to try to walk through it one by one. So first we're going to do const, and I'm going to call it album info. I mean, certainly call whatever you want, but I think that's what I want. I'm going to do namespace equals true here. Otherwise, technically, we don't need a namespace every single module. Namespacing means you have to put in the name of the module first, and then the slash, and then either the mutation or the action or getter afterwards. But just I think it's pretty good styling, and it's a pretty good idea to always leave namespacing true on. It makes a little bit more, I guess you could say it's a little more complicated. You need to know how to interact with namespace modules, but I always leave it on. So I'm going to put in a state here. I'm going to put in error, null, albums, null. And I think that's what we're going to do. Now, we need to add a few other things. We're going to add mutations and actions and getters. So once again, these are the 4 things you want. Now you could also, I want to remind people that I've seen a lot of people actually put these in separate files. You can do that. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to do a video if you're interested on my channel. That's on Program with Erik. Just search on Google or look in the description below, where I'm going to show you guys how to do Vuex modules, and we'll look at different ways of doing it, including putting these in its own separate files. Okay, so we're going to do, we need to have a way to set the album. So this is where, you know, each album has a list of pictures in it. So we want to have a way to set the array of albums, essentially. So we're going to do state.albums equals payload. So that's the only mutation we want to have. Now everything else is going to be actions, and remember we have actions because actions is the only thing that can handle some things that are asynchronous. So we want an async create album, and inside create album we're going to have a dispatch because we want to actually set it to that set albums when it's done. And well, we'll actually do a few things here. We'll do create album, and for now we're just going to set this to blank. I'll show you how that's going to work in a second. So we're going to create a new album. We're going to do a try and a catch. Okay, in our try, we're going to use the API GraphQL endpoint. So we're going to have to import that in. So we're going to import API from AWS Amplify. And we're actually going to need a couple of more. We're going to use this something called GraphQL operation, which allows us to do GraphQL operations. So we're going to add that in there, GraphQL operation, and then we're also going to use storage. Well, we'll look at storage in a second, but let's just look at those two, API GraphQL operation. And now we need a way to actually create albums, and I'm going to import that in too. So I'm going to import, we're going to call it create album as create album mutation from at GraphQL mutations. And you're probably thinking, well, how do you know that it's called create album mutation? Well, we do, because if we look into the GraphQL, we can look at mutations. Let's see here, create album mutation. We got to look at different mutations here. I think there's one called create album mutation. So let's look at create album mutation. So I think what's happening here is, so what I'm doing is it's called create album, but I'm using, I got confused for a second. So I'm using an alias. So it's called create album mutation. So I know what I'm doing. So here's the create album right here. If I look for create album, you're right here, it's a mutation, and here's the inputs and the conditions of it, and you can take a look at the whole query here. Cool. So now I think we have everything we need to start off with this create album. So I'm going to, in this try, I'm going to wait API.GraphQL, and then this is where I put in my operation. You can see here GraphQL options, GraphQL options. So I'm going to do GraphQL operation. I'm going to pass in the create album mutation that I just created, that alias, and I'm going to put an input in of new album. So whatever the payload is, it's going to be passed in here and created. Cool. And then afterwards, if there's an error, and actually I left errors here, but for now I'm not going to use it because I'm not going to worry about errors right now. I'm just going to console log. I can do console.error, I guess. Create album error. Okay, so now we have our first mutation, which is create album. And now we could probably need ones to get the album data. So let's add that one. So that's going to be async get album. And we're going to do an album ID. And we're going to return this one, await API.GraphQL. Use that GraphQL operation again. And this time I need a way to get the album query. So let's add a couple more of these. I'm going to import in get album as get album query from at GraphQL queries. And by the way, I was going to say at the beginning of this video, but I've gotten a lot of inspiration out of this. There is a AWS conference every year called AWS reInvent. And so part of what I'm showing you today is a workshop. I changed it around. They used React and a few other things. So this is very heavily inspired by an actual workshop that AWS put on at their AWS reInvent in 2019 that I was at. So just give a shout out there. I'll include a link in the description to the workshop that had some information about this. Cool. So now we have queries here, and also I want to add in, well, let's add in a list albums too, because we're going to have to need that, and I'll add that in. So we're going to do list albums as list albums query from at, okay, at GraphQL/queries. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I have both those in there. Now, so for this GraphQL operation for the get album, we're going to use the get album query we just created, get album query, and then we can pass in the input, which we need the ID and then the album ID. So this will just get that one album. And then we'll probably need to list the query. Let's see here. Should we do list albums? I don't know. Yeah, let's do get albums data as well. So we'll do async get albums data. We're going to do a commit and then const albums data. We're going to wait. We're going to do API.GraphQL, GraphQL operation, and we're going to do the list album query, and it doesn't need to take any inputs in for that. And now we can commit set albums to the albums data.listAlbums.items. So this is essentially going to get the albums, and then it's going to set it into the set albums right here into this actual Vuex store. So I think that's all I'm going to do right this second. Let's see if we can at least create an album and list an album. We probably need one more. We're going to add a little getters in here. So we're going to do albums state, and I guess we could do it this way. And we're going to return state.albums. We don't even need this return statement or this semicolon. Okay, so now we have our getters, and then we have ways to get albums, get an individual album. We can get all the albums data. We can also create an album, and then we're setting the album. And now we need to go into, we have this albums. We can go into our index here and import it in. So we're going to import album info from /albums/albums.js, and then we'll do album info, and that'll be our namespace that we use throughout the app. So let's start this up. Well, let's check to see if it's still running. Okay, dependency was not found. Store albums.js. Let's see here. Maybe I don't need. Oops, actually I found the error. I misspelt mutations there. Mutations. I'm going to save it. Cool, so now it's working again. no errors, it looks like. If I go back to my, make this a little smaller, go back to my app, refresh it. It's loading without any errors. Cool. So let's see in this albums page if I can get it to actually create an album. So to do that, we're going to go into our albums component here in our page. Let me take a look. Albums page. And we're essentially going to add some information inside here. So let's start by creating this information that we need here. So I want anytime you go into this component, I want it to just grab any albums if there's any in there so we can list them. So I'm going to do this.store.dispatch. I'm going to dispatch album info / get albums data, which I believe is what I called. Let's see here. If I look in the albums, get albums data. Yep, that looks right. Good deal. So now I have get albums data here, so it'll just automatically do that as soon as this component is mounted. And then in the data object, I'm going to do it this way. I want to have an album name, so we're going to show the album name, and then if there's any errors, we'll have an error as well. So in the methods, we're going to have a button that opens the album details. So we want to actually go to the album details. And to do that, we're going to call it open album detail. And that'll be called album. We'll be passing an album to that. And this will do this .router .push. And we'll go to album. And remember, we have a special route where we can pass in the ID, and we'll pass in the album.id. Cool. And now we needed one to create an album. We'll create an album, and we'll put this.error equals nothing here. And then if not this.album name, meaning that they didn't actually enter a name for the album, because we want them to enter a name in first, we'll give an error that says please enter an album name, and we'll return. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and just try to create this album. So we're going to call it a new album, and inside there we need a name, this.album name. We're going to have an owner, which is this.user.username. That's going to be out of the authentication that we have. And the owner ID, which will be this.user.id. And then finally, we'll dispatch it. We'll dispatch the store album info. Remember, we called it create album. And we'll pass in the new album const that we just created. Okay, easy peasy so far. And then we need some computed properties here. So this is our methods. So we'll have it computed here. And we're going to use a new, we haven't done this yet, but we're going to use a Vuex helper called mapGetters. So we're going to import in mapGetters from Vuex. And then these mapGetters, we're going to destructure it, getters, and this will return user, and we're going to grab basically the module from user, and the albums, which is from album info / albums. Okay, so now we have all this in place. We have our create album, we have open album details and map getters, and now we just need the HTML. So I'm going to copy and paste this HTML in here from a different file. That way, just to, once again, to save a little bit of time. Okay, so first we do create or choose an album as our title, and then we have an input right here, which is where we're going to type in the name of the album name. It's a type text, it's an input, and we're going to have this bound. Remember, vModel two-way data binds the album name. We're going to have a button here when you click create album that it actually just puts this into, it actually just triggers this create album method. We could have surrounded this by a form input if we wanted to, but I just decided this would be easier. And now we have a list of albums, and that's going to take this albums, but remember we have this getter down here that actually runs this, gets this getter, which gets this albums, and it's going to just do a v4 on it, and it's going to have a click handler that you're going to pass each individual album to the album detail to go to the detail page, and then it has an album name in each card. So cool. So here it is. So we have create or choose an album, and we have no albums yet. So let's create our first album to see if this works. We're going to do, we'll just call it wildlife. I don't know, wildlife pictures. Create album. I'm waiting for it to do something, and right now I do not see any errors, so I'm going to make sure everything's saved. Refresh it one more time. Let's try it one more time. I think I have a bug somewhere. Oh, there it is. Wildlife pictures. Just took a second. Let's try another one. So soon as our albums page, as soon as we create album, it's creating it, and then it dispatches this to new albums, which should update the albums here. So let's do album 2. Okay, so I found my issue here. So I'm creating the album here, but I'm not actually updating the get albums data so it updates the store. So I can do this easily here. I'm going to change this to dispatch, because we dispatch actions. So once it's done creating the album, we want to dispatch the get albums data. So you're going to do get albums data. So let's see if that works. Okay, we have album 2. Let's create album 3. Cool. So now this is automatically updating, and list of albums are all showing up here, which is nice. Now if we click on any of these albums, album 2, it's going to our albums page. It passed in the ID at the top. So yeah, cool. So it's all working correctly. And we click back on albums. Albums here. All right, so the next thing we need to do is to actually get this to create photos. So we need to kind of figure out how we're going to do this albums detail page and create a photo, so that way we can actually list photos in that page itself. So let's go back and add something to our auth. So we have our auth here in our albums. Well, let's actually add something to our albums, and we want to add a way to create photos in this album here. And so let's go ahead and do that. So this create photo is going to be a little bit big, but I think this is nice. This create photo, it's really up to us if we want to add it into the Vuex store, or if we want to add it in directly to the component itself. But I think it makes sense to add into the Vuex store. So I'm going to just go to the bottom here, and we're going to call it async create photo. And we need some data, so we're going to have some data as a payload passed into it. So first, we actually need to grab some stuff out of the AWS config file. So let's go ahead and add that in here. So we're going to let's import a couple of other things. We're going to need a UUID from the UUID library we installed at the very beginning of this video, because we'll need that. We'll need storage, because now we're going to be actually accessing storage. And we're going to import the AWS config file from the @AWS exports. And we're going to have to create a new mutation. So we'll import a mutation. We'll call it create photo as create photo mutation as our alias from @/GraphQL/mutations. I'll make sure I type that right. And I think that's everything we're going to need to do what we need to do for this create photo. So let's go back down. Oh, it says we have an error. Once again, I misspelled mutations. Make sure I have that. And UUID from UUID v4 was not found. I may have not. Let me check my UUID in my package.json. Oops. So I did install UUID here. I think there's actually a version 4 of this. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to do an npm install UUID v4. So let's just take a moment. This UUID 4 is just a little bit of a newer version. Okay, so I went ahead and installed that UUID v4, and then I went ahead and changed the import so it imports it in correctly. So let's go ahead and see if we can get create photo, and we have some errors here, but hopefully we'll get rid of them as we fix this create photo. So in this create photo, we need to grab some stuff out of AWS. I'm just going to copy and paste this from my other page so I don't mistype it. So this is just grabbing that out of that file. And now we need to, we're going to, essentially a file is being sent over in that data. So we're going to grab some information out of it, out of data. And then we're going to grab the extension, which is file.name.substring, file.name.last index of dot +1. And then we're going to use that photo ID the UUID to create basically a photo ID. And we're going to create a key, and we're going to do, it's going to be on images. Essentially, this is where it's going to be held. Photo ID dot, and this is going to be the extension that we just created. And now we need to create input data for this. So this input data is everything we're going to be feeding into our GraphQL query. So we need photo ID, we need photo album ID, which will be the ID here. We need the content type, which will be the MIME type, and full size. And once again, you can look at the GraphQL query that we created to understand what these inputs are. Region, region, bucket, bucket. And we can kind of simplify this. We could simplify this. I'm just going to leave it like this. Well, we can do it like this. This will be the same thing. Okay, so now we have, now we have input data. So now we need to try to create the file in the S3 bucket. So let's do a try and a catch. So I'm just going to label this S3 bucket storage add file to it. So here we're going to do await storage.put. We need to put the key, the file, and then here is an object level. We're going to put it protected because we know that you have to be authorized to see it. And it's going to be MIME type. And then we're sending some metadata with it, which will be the album ID, and then photo ID. Cool, and if that succeeds, then we want to await the API.GraphQL mutation. Remember, we're going to use that GraphQL operation again, and this time we're going to use the create photo mutation, which we're then passing in the input, that input data that we created. And so if that returns, now we can return a promise.resolve success. Otherwise, we'll console log create, this will be create photo error. We'll send the error so we can figure out what happened, and then we'll return a promise.reject error so we can pass in the error. Sweet, so that's it for creating our photo. So we're doing two things here. First, we're grabbing the AWS config data. We're basically constructing the photo an extension, and then we're creating an input data. We're pushing, that should be a put. We're going to put the storage data into the S3 bucket. That's what this will do. And then if that all works, then we're going to create the mutation inside the GraphQL operation, which will then resolve with the success here. And this will create basically the photo inside the bucket, so that way later on the GraphQL list photos can list the photos for us. Sweet. All right, so we have get albums, create albums, set albums. So we don't have a way right now to list albums. Oh, we do. We have get albums data, but we don't have a way to list the photos. But I'll show you guys how to do that here soon. So let's see if, since now we have this way of creating the photo, let's see if we can get this the albums details page working right. So let me just give me 1 second here. So we're going to go into album detail page. And from here, we need to do a few things. So let's start with the mounted hook. Well, maybe we'll do methods first. So in methods here, we're going to do an async for get photos. So we want a way to grab all the photos that I just mentioned earlier, so that way we can list them on this page. And then we also obviously need a way to create photos, but we'll get that in a second. So const, we'll create an album here, album, and await this dot store dispatch album info / get album, and then we'll pass in this .id, which we haven't created yet, but we will in a second. And then this .photos. Here, probably what I should do is create this data object real quickly, so this makes more sense. So I'll create this data object, and this data object will have inside it photos, which is an array of photos. Has album name, which will be the album name. And yeah, I think that's it. And then we're going to be passed in props. We're going to be passed in ID as one of the props into this album detail. Actually, now that I think about it, we're going to be using, it's being passed in not through props, but it's going to be passed in through the query params. So it should be through route.params.id. So I'm going to create a computed property here. This will make sense in a second. And we'll call it ID. And this will return this .route.params.id. So that should be what that is. There should be a comma there. Okay, so that makes more sense. So now we have the route params ID comes in. Now this .photos is this .photos will now equal album.data.get album.photos.items. So you really have to, if you don't know, you might want to go through this a few times, run these queries, see what it returns back, but essentially you have to kind of go this deep in to grab the actual list of photos from the query that comes back. So, and we know this album name will be album.data.getAlbum.name. Okay, I think that works. Oh, we got an error. Duplicate key of ID. Oops, I don't need this props right here. Okay, so no errors. Good. And now that we have this get photos, the only thing I want to do is I want to do an async. Anytime this runs, I'm going to do a mounted hook, lifecycle hook for mounted. I'm just going to run this .photos. This .get photos, I should say. Get photos. Cool. So this will be ran anytime. It'll just go in, dispatch the get album, and it'll grab the photos and it'll grab the album name, so we'll see that. And the last thing we want to do in this is actually list the photos. And to do that, we need to create a new, create photos is what I want to do next. And I'm going to call this on file change. It's going to be passed in the file. So we're going to have a form with an input and an input with type file in a second. And first I want to just, if the file doesn't have a target or doesn't have a file.target.files array, so we're only caring about the first file they select, we'll just return. So now we're just going to have a try catch block. Error. And this is where we're going to actually try to create a photo. So we're going to dispatch the album info create photo, and now we're going to pass in an object with the file, which will be the file.target.files, the first one is the one we care about, and this will be this.id from that computed property. And then if that all works well, we want to do this.getPhotos, so it just updates it and lists the photos for us. And we'll do console. There's an error, we'll just console log the error create photo error. Cool. So I think we have everything in our data here to actually be able to create our photos, get our photos, and do all that. Now we just need to add in the HTML. One thing I want to add in here real quickly is we're going to use, before, if you remember at the beginning of this tutorial, I said we weren't going to use any of the built-in Vue UI components, but we are going to use one here called Amplify S3 image, and you'll see here it's just a little bit easier to work with than trying to get the storage input. And I'll show you. It's actually, I won't show you in this one, but it's a whole lot of boilerplate to use the storage and grab the photos and then set them. So we'll just use it this way. So I'll show you what I did here. I'm just copying, pasting code. So we have album. We're going to show the album name. Now we have a form that has it's a multi-type part form data, and it has so here's some SVGs. This is a little box that'll open up a little picture, and you click on it so you can select a file. And then on change, this is this event. This at sign is a view for Vue events. When the change event happens, on file change will get triggered, and it's only accept images. It's gonna be hidden in here. And then we have a list of photos, which we're gonna vif only if the photos exist. And then we're gonna use a v4 to go through every single photo. And then we have this Amplify S3 image. And so this, if we go to the official documentation and we look at libraries, and we change it to actually UI components, and then change this to Vue, and then do storage, there is an S3. There's an S3 image picker, but there's also the S3 image. And in this S3 image, you can pass in button text, content types, but essentially you can pass in the level, which is protected, which means it's going to be authenticated, and then the image key, which is the right now I put in photo thumbnail, but actually this thumbnail, it doesn't exist yet. I'm going to add this in here now, but in my next section I'll show you guys how we can add a Lambda to display it, and it'll actually convert the images into thumbnails, and it'll also grab GPS data. But in the meantime, we can just change this to photo.thumbnail key. Actually, I think it's photo full size key. That's the full size photo. And then I have a little width on there. And then this whole GPS data right now, I'm just going to comment this out, delete these. We're going to do this in the next section too. So I'm going to save it. Oh, I got an error. Okay, so it says there's an error down here with my Amplify S3 image. It doesn't like this for some reason. So let me see if I can fix this. Oops, I actually got an error here. So I accidentally deleted this end of this div. Let me save it. See here if it, okay, cool. Everything's working again. So let's see if what it looks like. So I'm gonna refresh it. It's looking at one of the albums I created. Cool. So now I have this album, album 3, list photos. Here's all my albums again. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a photo. So let's click on album 2. I'm gonna select a file. Choose the first one. Oh, by the way, it says UUID v4 is deprecated. Use v4 instead. We're not going to worry about that. Cool. All right. So it looks like the picture loaded. So if I go back to albums, go back to album 2. Cool. So now I have my picture book here. I can see I can select as many as I want. I can select a different album book 3, let's say, and I can, post a different picture here. And there it is. So it uploaded that picture. It doesn't look too good, but that's it. Awesome. So now we have a very basic photo book here. So the next thing we need to do is to let's see if we can make it grab the data out of the photo book, the GPS data, and display that for the user. So we'll look at that next. Okay, so we've made it quite far. All this time we have added a fully functional album, but we want to see if we can add in basically a Lambda function that runs anytime an S3 bucket is updated. And you can do all sorts of things. You could have it text message you. You could have it update something in the database. You could, like we're doing, you could do a ton of different things. So this is just a very simple operation we're going to do here right now, and that's to just add in a trigger. So to do that, we're going to stop our server here, and we're going to clear it, and let's add a few things here. So we need to do amplify add function, and this is how we add a Lambda function. A Lambda function basically is a function that will run any that just runs anytime it gets an input coming into it. So it kind of lays idle, and then it warms up, and then it does whatever function it needs to, and then it turns itself off. So let's see here. It's going to ask you Lambda function serverless or Lambda layer. So I'm going to do a serverless function. And it's going to ask us for a name. I'm going to call it Amplify Photo Processor. And then choose the function template. Well, provide the AWS Lambda function name. I'm just going to leave it the same. And we're going to use it Node.js. And we're going to use the hello world as the type here. And then do you want to access other resources in this project? Do yes. And it's going to ask to select the category. I want it the API. And I'm going to hit enter there. And I'm going to give it the option to read. And do you want to invoke the function recurring schedule? No. Do you want to configure Lambda layers for this function? I'm going to do no. Do you want to edit the local Lambda function now? No. Cool. So it went ahead and added this function, and it went ahead and nicely opened it up in VS Code for us. I appreciate it. And if you don't know where it is, it's in the Amplify backend function Amplify photo processor source index.js file. So I'm going to actually go to that directory real quickly right now. I'm going to change directory to the Amplify backend function Amplify photo processor source. So in this folder here, you can see here's the index file, the event.json file, and I want to install a few things. So we're going to install Axios. So we're going to do a little Axios. It's like an HTTP library. AWS 4 is a library for AWS to do things. The XF reader. So we'll install those. So it'll just take a second. Cool. And then we're going to install, I'm going to copy and paste this from a different page here. And this will be this will essentially allow us to do a reading of the GPS data. So we have to install this sharp library. So it's npm install -- arch equals x64 platform Linux sharp. So this will just take a second. All right, so now we have this everything we want inside this folder here. We have this package.json, has all our different libraries we need, our dependencies. And now we can essentially add in our function here. Now I'm going to copy and paste this. And once again, I got this from the AWS Amplify Workshop at AWS Workshop at AWS reInvent last year. So I'll give credit to those guys coming up with this, but we'll walk through it to see what it is doing. Since this tutorial is getting quite long, I don't want to waste your guys' time. So what this is saying is we're requiring all these libraries here. We're also requiring sharp, and then this API sync URL, we're going to actually have to grab it. This actually might be wrong, but after we create the Lambda function, this is the sync URL that we'll need. And I don't think I have it listed anywhere here. So we're going to have to grab it after it's already created. So that could be wrong. And then essentially there's this function here that gets created anytime the app loads. It starts the, here it is. So right here, this export handler, this gets triggered as soon as the function starts. This is the main handler for the Lambda. So it's going to grab the bucket name from the event that comes through as the parameter, because basically anytime the S3 bucket is done uploading, it'll trigger this Lambda. And then it's going to grab the key, and then it's going to load the image, and it's going to create the thumbnail and grab the metadata, and it's going to update the photo record, which right here is this mutation. It does this update photo mutation. And then you have this AWS 4 where you can actually pass in through GraphQL like the whole mutation. And if there's no errors, it won't display an error. So essentially what this does is it as soon as the upload's done, it'll go ahead and talk to the AWS Amplify GraphQL endpoint, and it'll load the data essentially for the GPS data and everything else using this update photo mutation. So that's what this does. I'm not going to go into detail in every single one of these, but take a look at this file. It'll be included inside the actual projects in the description. You can see here it's doing all sorts of things, creating this thumbnail using Sharp. So I'm going to save this. And now I'm going to do a quick update to the storage too, because it needs to be updated. So before we do anything, I'm going to do Amplify storage. I think it's storage update. And we're going to put in here, I think we need to do images, audio, video. And we're going to select auth users only. And we're going to hit enter here. And now here, do you want to add a Lambda trigger to your S3 bucket? Yes. And we're going to choose an existing function from the project. And we're going to do the Amplify photo processor, the one we just created. Cool. So now it should trigger the Lambda as soon as the upload occurs, which is perfect. We actually need to do a couple of more things for this to work right. We actually, every time you create a function, it creates the CloudFormation scripts. So if we look in this function parameter, let's see here, there's an application. So here is the source folder for the function Amplify photo processor. And then there's this Amplify photo processor CloudFormation template. And so this gets run every time we do that Amplify push. And so I just need to make a quick change here. So I need to look at the runtime, Node.js. Yeah, it does Node.js 12x. and it has a timeout. I'm just going to add in a memory size of 1536. That way it can kind of, otherwise it may not have enough memory for all these pictures. And then in the action for App Sync, I think it's, yeah, so here's the App Sync. We have this create and this start, and then App Sync GraphQL. So I'm just get rid of this create and start creation. So it's just going to have App Sync GraphQL. I think that should work. All right, so now I have all those in, and let me go ahead and make one more change. So now we can look at our queries in this GraphQL queries. We're going to look at this one right here. And now we need to change the query so basically the get album. Let's see here, this one right here. So it works a little differently, and it grabs the GPS data inside of it. So we don't have it actually doing that here. So I'm going to change this get album. I'm going to copy and paste this from another screen again, because I think that'll be a little easier. I don't want to mess up this mutation. There we go. See, the biggest difference is now we have this GPS full size, and it's in the right format for us. And now we can go back in. If we remember, we actually have this inside our album details page. Remember, I had this huge this comment right here. I commented out, so now I can uncomment it out. And I have this image key, this full size key. Well, now we actually will have a thumbnail too, so we can grab that one out. So let me make sure I have that details right. So it should look more like this image key here. So I'm going to, there we go. So instead of having this photo key here, we're gonna have this one, and this just says use the thumbnail if it exists, otherwise use the full size key. All right, I think we've got everything in place now. And let's go ahead and let's take a look. We'll do Amplify status and Amplify push. And we'll say yes here, and let's just take a moment. Okay, so it went ahead and updated everything in the cloud. So let's take a look at our AWS services. So I'm back into the AWS console again, and now I should be able to go to S3 and see if actually I want to go to I can see my S3 buckets, but I want to go to my actual Lambda functions. So I'm typing Lambda there, and now it should open up. All right, so here's my Photobook. I think this is it here, Amplify Photo Processor Dev. Now make sure I'm in the right region, East 2. You see I have an S3 trigger here that's triggering this Amplify Proto Processor. And by the way, so I need this endpoint. This is the GraphQL endpoint that I need. So let me make an update to this Lambda. And remember, I can always go to the Amplify folder, backend, and function, source, index. That's the actual folder it's in. And now this endpoint here, I can delete to here and copy paste. So that's the the GraphQL endpoint that I was looking for. So let me just do a quick update to it. I'm going to amplify push, and this will just take a second. Okay, so went ahead and finished. So here is the moment of truth. I'm going to start the server again. Actually, I'll need to make sure I go back a few directories. Then back to the root folder. Okay, I'm going to run npm run serve. It's going to run my app again. I'm going to give it a second to start. And so what we're going to try to do is see if things work correctly. So this is the moment of truth. This is the last part of this tutorial. Appreciate you guys hanging on all this time. If you have, leave a comment below. Let me know if you have, and say I made it. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this to the end of this tutorial, to this list albums. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just log out, make sure there's no issues. 101. Signing in. Cool. So I'm going to album 2. Have my picture in there. Now we're going to have to kind of go back in and out of here. So I'm going to go select photo. This house definitely has GPS data in it. Don't worry about the deprecation warning. Now I don't have any, I didn't add in any a timer, but I could have added in a little spinner here while it's uploading, but it doesn't. So you don't see any GPS data now, but let's go out. Let's go back in. Cool. So now it has GPS data, and this is actually a thumbnail and not the full picture, which is really cool. So we have created at, we have latitude and longitude. So we've done it. Cool. So we did it. We have gone through the complete tutorial. Well, now we have our working photo album. We can even grab latitude, longitude out of it. We have all these pictures. I mean, I think the next steps in this would be to add in like hosting with Amplify console. You can also add machine learning. You can do a whole bunch of really crazy things, but I'm going to go ahead and end the tutorial here. Once again, I want to thank Traversy Media and Brad for letting me be on his channel today. I hope you guys learned something, and also make sure you check out my channel and the link in the description too. Thanks.